Publicly kissing my affair partner in front of my husband was a bold, reckless move, but it shattered everything in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't planned. Nothing about that night was. But when the moment came, I didn't hesitate. It was a Friday evening, the kind of night where the air buzzed with the electricity of freedom and indulgence. The bar was crowded, filled with people laughing, drinking, and letting loose. I was among them, but unlike most of the others, my laughter carried the weight of a double life. David, my affair partner, stood beside me. He was everything I'd convinced myself I needed. Charming, exciting, and spontaneous. With him, I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel like the wife who had to tread carefully around her husband's expectations, or the woman who had been quietly suffocating under the weight of a marriage that no longer felt like home. With David, I felt alive, even if that life was built on lies. My husband, John, was at the other end of the bar with his friends, oblivious to what was happening. He was a good man, steady, reliable, and kind, but our relationship had grown complicated over the years. We no longer laughed like we used to, no longer looked at each other with the same warmth. I'd spent months justifying my choices to myself, convincing myself that the affair was an escape I deserved. The drinks flowed, the music thumped, and the lines between right and wrong blurred further. David and I laughed together, the alcohol stripping away my inhibitions. For once, I wasn't hiding behind closed doors or pretending to be someone I wasn't. It felt intoxicatingly liberating. Then it happened. I don't know what overtook me in that moment. Maybe it was the thrill of being seen, of breaking free from the shadows of secrecy. Maybe it was the delusion that I could start a new life, right then and there. Without thinking, I turned to David, leaned in, and kissed him. The kiss was passionate and unrestrained, a public declaration of a private rebellion. For a moment, everything else faded away, the crowd, the noise, the consequences. But when I pulled back and saw David's surprised, pleased expression, reality came crashing back. I turned toward John. He had seen everything. Time seemed to freeze. His face was frozen in a mixture of shock and disbelief. His friends, who had been mid-conversation, were now staring at me, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion and then discomfort. John's mouth opened as though he wanted to say something, but no words came out. His eyes, wide and glassy, locked onto mine, and I felt a pang of guilt so sharp it nearly took my breath away. The silence that followed was unbearable. It felt as though the entire bar had gone quiet, though I knew that wasn't true. The world around us continued to move, oblivious to the personal disaster unfolding within it. John didn't yell. He didn't make a scene. Instead, he stood there, staring at me as though I were a stranger. When he finally turned away, it was as if a door had closed between us, one that I wasn't sure I could ever reopen. The rest of the night was a blur. John barely looked at me as we left the bar, his friends' awkward goodbyes ringing in my ears. The drive home was suffocatingly silent. I wanted to say something, to explain or apologize, but I didn't know where to begin. Part of me wanted to downplay it, to pretend it was a spur-of-the-moment mistake, but I knew better. That kiss wasn't just an impulsive act. It was the culmination of everything I had been hiding for the past year. When we got home, John went straight to the bedroom without a word. He shut the door behind him, leaving me alone in the darkened hallway. The house, usually a place of comfort, now felt like a prison. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank television screen, my mind racing. Eventually, I worked up the courage to face him. When I opened the bedroom door, I found him sitting on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped tightly together. He looked up at me, his eyes cold and sharp. "Do you want to explain yourself?" His voice was controlled, but the anger simmered just beneath the surface. I hesitated, standing in the doorway like a guilty child. "I didn't mean for you to see that," I said quietly. "It's not what you think." He scoffed, his expression hardening. "You kissed him. In front of me. How am I supposed to take that? I thought we had a marriage. I thought we had trust." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. My excuses, my justifications, all fell hollow in the face of his hurt. I had spent so long convincing myself that I was in control, that I could keep my secrets buried. But now, the truth was laid bare, and there was no taking it back. In the days that followed, John avoided me as much as possible. He left for work early, came home late, and barely spoke to me. The silence between us was heavy, filled with unspoken words and unresolved pain. I tried to convince myself that things would eventually blow over, but deep down, I knew better. I had crossed a line that couldn't be erased. Alone with my guilt, I began to see the full extent of what I had done. The kiss wasn't just a moment of recklessness. It was a declaration of everything I had been hiding, everything I had been lying about. It wasn't just a kiss. It was the beginning of the end. The warmth we once shared had slowly faded, and in its place was a deep silence, one heavy with anger and hurt. As the days passed, I couldn't escape the realization of how deeply I had wounded John. I knew I had destroyed his trust, and no matter how many times I tried to apologize or explain, it felt like nothing could undo the damage. What I had, was now nothing more than a distant memory, lost beneath the weight of betrayal. For years, I had convinced myself that the affair was just an escape. It didn't mean anything, I told myself. It was a temporary lapse, a way to feel alive when everything else seemed so dull. But now, as I saw John's broken heart and his pain etched across his face, I knew the truth. The affair had meant more than I had ever acknowledged, and it had cost me everything. In the days that followed the confrontation, we barely spoke. Whenever I tried to approach John, he gave me a look, cold, distant, and full of hurt, that made it clear he wasn't ready to listen to anything I had to say. And deep down, I couldn't blame him. I had betrayed him in the worst possible way. No words, no matter how sincere, could take away the pain I had caused. He deserved more than excuses, more than justifications. He deserved someone who would never hurt him in the way I had. One evening, I sat alone in the living room, staring at my phone. It buzzed with a message from David. His name on the screen made something inside me twist with regret. The message was simple. Just a "Hey, how are you holding up?" But it was enough to make me pause. David had been my escape. He was the one who had made me feel desired, alive, wanted. But now, with everything falling apart around me, I wasn't sure if it had been worth it. What had I really gained? I had used him to fill a void in my life, but in doing so, I had lost everything I truly cared about. My marriage, my family, and my own sense of who I was. I didn't reply to David's message right away. Instead, I sat there, frozen, staring at the screen. The weight of my actions pressed down on me. I scrolled through our past messages, seeing how quickly things had escalated with David, how easily I had fallen into the affair, convincing myself it didn't matter. But now, with John pulling away and the truth out in the open, I saw just how much it had all meant. It wasn't just about one kiss or one night. It was about everything I had betrayed, everything I had thrown away. The tension in the house continued to grow. Days passed in strained silence, and then one evening, John finally confronted me. I was sitting at the kitchen table when he walked in. He didn't sit down, didn't make any small talk. He just stood there, looking at me with eyes full of anger. "Are you still seeing him?" John asked, his voice low but steady. I froze. I had known this question was coming, but now that it was here, I couldn't avoid it. I had been hoping that somehow it wouldn't have to be asked, that the truth wouldn't come out. But now, facing John, I couldn't lie. I had already lied too much. "No," I whispered, my voice shaky. "I haven't seen him since that night." John nodded slowly, his face unreadable. Then he spoke again, his voice quiet but filled with hurt. "I don't understand you," he said. "You kissed him in front of me. In front of everyone. How could you do that?" The question hung in the air, and I couldn't find an answer. How could I explain what had driven me to such a reckless act? How could I make him understand? The truth was, I didn't know. I didn't know why I had done it, why I had let things get so out of control. All I knew was that I had hurt him, betrayed him in the worst possible way, and now there was no way to undo that. I don't know, I stammered, my mind racing. I was just so caught up in everything. It wasn't about him, John. It was about me. I've been lost. I didn't know how to fix what was broken. John let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "So you thought kissing him would fix things? You think kissing someone else in front of your husband is how you fix things?" I had no defense. No justification. His words cut through me like a knife, and I knew he was right. There was no excuse for what I had done. I had failed him in every possible way. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Finally, John spoke again, his voice quieter now but filled with resolve. "I can't keep doing this," he said, his words like a final verdict. "I can't live in a marriage where I'm constantly questioning your loyalty, where I wonder who you're kissing when I'm not around. I'm not asking for perfection, but I need honesty. I need trust. And right now, I don't have that." His words hit me like a slap to the face. I could feel the weight of his rejection, the finality in his voice. But I also knew, deep down, that he was right. I had shattered the trust we once had, and no matter how much I wanted to fix it, I didn't know how. "I understand," I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper. "I've ruined everything. I don't know if there's a way back." The days that followed were a blur of emotions, arguments, silences, and fleeting attempts at reconnection. John spent more and more time away from home. Each time he came back, it felt like we were two strangers, passing each other by in a house that no longer felt like a home. There were no more shared moments, no more laughter. The marriage I had once taken for granted was unraveling, thread by thread. David continued to text me, asking how I was holding up, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I knew that getting involved with him again would only make everything worse. My marriage was crumbling, and the last thing I needed was to drag another person into the mess I had created. The final straw came a few days later when John sat me down and said the words I had been dreading for so long. "I think we need to separate," he said, his voice filled with resignation. My heart shattered. I had always thought that if things ever got this bad, I would fight to make things right. But now, looking at John, the man I had betrayed, I realized that fighting wasn't enough. It wasn't just about fixing things. It was about understanding that some things can never be fixed. And so, here I am, standing in the ruins of what was once my life. My marriage is over, my relationship with my kids is strained, and I am left alone with the consequences of my actions. I never thought that a single kiss, one reckless decision, could change everything. But it did. Now, I have to find a way to rebuild, though I'm not sure where to start.